Welcome back to the Kriya Yoga Podcast, the Infinite Season, Episode 8. In this episode, we're going to continue with the theme from Episode 7, and we're going to explore the idea and the yogic principle of Chitta. In the previous episode, we discussed Nirodha. In the Yoga Sutras, Chapter 1, we find the definition of yoga to be Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. We have 4 Sanskrit terms there. Yoga, Nirodha, which is the ending, the cessation of the fluctuations of the changes in the field of consciousness. Vritti, which are those changes and fluctuations. And then Chitta. And it is in the field of Chitta that these fluctuations occur or are being observed, experienced directly. And to lead into this contemplation, I have a quote from Vyas Houston, the director and founder of the American Sanskrit Institute. He wrote that the definition of yoga that appears at the beginning of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is a perfect example of terminology that is as technical with regard to the process of yoga meditation as the mathematical equations that define the behavior of atoms in the field of physics. For example, yoga equals Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. This is a fundamental principle, and it's equivalent to E equals mc squared in physics. He goes on to say that without understanding the word Chitta, the equation can't be grasped. There are no English equivalents for Chitta. To substitute an English word like mind or mind stuff makes a genuine understanding of yoga virtually inaccessible. To leave the word Chitta as it is and make an inquiry into its meaning by contemplating its use throughout the Yoga Sutra text leads to meaning as rich in dimension as life itself. This is a very important idea, and this realization didn't dawn on me until many, many years after practicing Kriya Yoga, after studying the Yoga Sutras, after contemplating many commentaries on the Yoga Sutras. It was through a direct exploration of the reality of Chitta, a looking into it, again, based on how it is used and maybe defined in the Yoga Sutras, that led to a direct aha moment about what Chitta actually is. Now, as I studied the Yoga Sutras, I often read those definitions that said that Chitta is the mind, or the mind field, or the mind stuff. And I was very fortunate in that my Kriya Yoga teacher, Roy Eugene Davis, would speak of Chitta as the individualized field of awareness, the individualized field of awareness. And I took that just a little step further. It's really the same thing. But when I speak of Chitta, I use the term the field of consciousness, because we have this consciousness which perceives and experiences everything on all levels. It perceives our mind, our emotions, our thoughts, our physical bodies, our physical sensations. But what is it perceiving? That is the field of consciousness. And that is what Chitta is, the field of consciousness. Now, I'm telling you that Chitta is the field of consciousness, and I want to encourage you not to just take that as a new word definition, that whenever you speak to someone about the Yoga Sutras, you substitute my words, the field of consciousness, or Mr. Davis's words, the individualized field of awareness. The whole purpose of this talk is to encourage you to have the direct experience yourself of what Chitta is. And let's consider another quote from Vyas Houston about Chitta. He says that Chitta is the individual life field, normally defined by, but not limited to, the parameters of the physical body. It consists of the purest and subtlest forms of matter and energy, such as sattva guna. Although any form of recording, from film and tape to microchips, offer a metaphor for Chitta's capacity to record the infinitely complex, multidimensional experience of life. They are crude by comparison. On the other hand, it's strange that we should be so compelled to have the finest and the fastest means of recording impressions of life through digital technology, when each of us already possesses an existing system that no advancement in technology will ever be able to duplicate. On the other hand, it's likely that our obsession or passion for clarity and speed of reproduction is based upon our great need to experience and utilize our own Chitta's capacity in its pristine state to sense and record the finest and subtlest experiences that life has to offer. This use of Chitta is precisely what yoga is all about from beginning to end. So again, if we return to that initial sutra in Pada 1 of the Yoga Sutras, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, it is saying that yoga is the ending, the cessation of the fluctuations and changes in the field of Chitta. So having a sense of Chitta, being aware essentially of what your Chitta is an absolute requirement in this process. So as you consider what your Chitta is, you can think about it in a couple different ways. Number one, it is the movie screen that your life experience is projected upon. And this isn't just a flat screen that light and shadow dance over. This is a screen that captures time, dimension, space, and beyond. Chitta is also that which records your experiences and your habits. And we'll refer once again to Vyas Houston's article on Chitta. He says that Chitta is programmable. It behaves in whatever way it is programmed or habituated to behave. If it is not consciously directed, it will conform to the activities or the vritti that have shaped it in the past. And this is very much like a default selection. He continues, thus prior to yoga, changes in Chitta are programmed by habits, physical habits, mental habits, sensory habits, all of which create repetitive patterns of experience, some pleasurable, some painful, but all contributing to a limited sense of self. And this is when Chitta is being confined to the definition of the body. It could be said that the changes occurring in Chitta are painfully slow. Yoga is a process of terminating the habitual activities which have been seen to be painful, and this is referred to as nirodha, another term better left untranslated. And of course, we did our best to explore nirodha in the previous episode of this podcast, but let's continue with Chitta. So we can see it as a movie screen. We can imagine it as a recording device. Every memory that you have, that is Chitta holding that memory. Every emotion that comes up in your body and you don't know where it comes from, that's an emotion that's been stored within your cells, within your field of consciousness. Every dream that you have, that is Chitta reflecting to you this dreamlike experience. So when you just stop and feel and look and sense, you are sensing your Chitta. The structure of your body is held together by these particles of Chitta. And so whenever you engage your yoga practice on any level, you are engaging this field of awareness, this field of consciousness. When you practice your asana to make your body stronger, well, you are changing the habits of Chitta. When you are practicing pranayama to purify or strengthen or calm the flows of life force within your body, your energy field, you again are redirecting the habits of Chitta. When you live according to the yamas and niyamas, you are cultivating the light of sattva within Chitta. When you choose to eat junk food, or when you choose to get caught up in dramas in your life, you are reinforcing the qualities of rajas and tamas within your Chitta. A very simple practice that I like to do from time to time is to sit still and observe the current state of my Chitta. And how do I do that? I do it in 3 stages. The first stage is that I pay attention to the physicality of my body. I notice, how does my body feel? How does it feel to have the weight of gravity pulling me down into the chair? What does it feel like to sense the clothing on my skin? What does the air feel like? And then I move inward to sense the internal structures of my body. I imagine that I can sense the structures of my bones, the movement of my breath, the feeling of my organs, the pulsation of the blood within my body. I focus on the sensations of air moving in through my nostrils, into my sinuses, and down into my lungs. Essentially what I'm doing is I am trying to feel as deeply and fully everything that my body can feel and experience, physically, externally, and internally. I'm not judging it. I'm not trying to change it. I'm simply observing what is the current state of Chitta as it is related to my physical body. And then the next step is I will imagine that I could sense energy within my body and around my body, as though I can feel a field of energy around and within my body. And I associate this with my emotional state as well. So whereas in the beginning, I might simply become aware of the warmth or coolness, the temperature that I feel throughout my body on a very diffuse level. And then I might become aware of the sense of warmth, temperature around the body. And sometimes when you've had maybe a massage or other kind of body work session, you become aware of sensations as though they're moving through your body. Are they physical sensations? Possibly, but they could also be energetic sensations. And we have to keep in mind that the very fact that you can feel your body, what you are actually feeling is energy. Because if there was not energy flowing through your body, the nerves would not carry the sensations to your nervous system. So I feel this more abstract, lighter, fuzzier feeling around and through my body. And I just notice, how does my body feel in this energetic way? Once again, I'm not trying to change it. I'm simply observing. And I pull in my emotions too, because in my understanding, the emotions are really tied into this energy of the body. And so I'll notice, do I have a feeling of happiness and warmth around my heart? Do I feel a heaviness or a sadness on my shoulders? Do I feel a tension in my legs? Do I feel an anxiety anywhere within the body? And again, this is abstract. You have to be creative. Since you've already focused on the physical, you're probably already fairly relaxed. So then you are just observing if there were emotions and fields around the body. What would that be like? Just observing. And there's an expansive feeling to that. And so now I'm becoming aware of what is my Chitta recording and what is my Chitta perpetuating. What are the habits of energy that are being perpetuated within this field of experience? And if I have time, I'll move on to a third phase. And in that third phase, I become aware of the field of thought. So it's as if I feel a space around my head, around my shoulders, around my body, as though that is the field of my mind. And I just observe, do any thoughts come in and go out within that field? And I observe, do any memories flash into my mind's eye and then go away? Do sentences come up? Do desires that I'm thinking about come up? I observe these things in a very, again, abstract and expansive manner. And by doing that, I'm noticing, well, what is the current state of this mental field of my chitta? And in that whole process, I become aware of the vritti, the fluctuations, the changes that are recycling through this field of chitta, from the physical, the energetic, emotional, and to the mental, to the mind, to the thoughts. And the interesting thing that occurs from this perspective is that now, as you have observed these things, you can go a little step further and you can acknowledge, well, what was it that was observing these changes and fluctuations in chitta? And you can have a sense that you are this seer, without characteristics, somehow present, somehow able to recognize all of these changes. That is your consciousness. And you are then observing your field of consciousness, which is chitta. And if you do this enough, a little every day, you start to catch a realization, a glimpse. You start to recognize in a very visceral, experiential way what chitta is. And it moves beyond these definitions I've tried to use. And it moves into a way of being. It reveals knowledge. It's like you're becoming aware, more aware of what you are as the seer, observing all these changes within the field. And we can look to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras again. The way chitta is used throughout the Yoga Sutras, if you pay attention to it, based on what we've just discussed, you will gain more and more insights into chitta. But there's one great sutra, well, they're all great, but one in particular that helps our purpose today. And that is Sutra 41 of Chapter 1. The translation is, when the modifications of chitta have been weakened, it becomes like a flawless crystal, taking the color of whatever it rests upon, whether the knower, the instrument, or the object. And this is called samapatti, or absorption. And those of you who are Yoga Sutra purists, I do realize that the word chitta is not actually in that sutra. In fact, they're talking about those yogis whose modifications, those fluctuations in chitta have been weakened. Then there's this sense of chitta as a jewel or a crystal. And Patanjali doesn't use words unless they are precise in what he's trying to convey. And what you will recognize as time passes through your study and practice of yoga is that chitta actually feels like this crystal or this jewel. And in another text, Varas Houston describes this as a lens, as though chitta has this lens-like purity. And if I recall, he describes if you're on a beach and you have this perfect lens that you can't see, but it amplifies everything around it, and the light flows through it. And if you had this lens on the beach and you came across it, while you couldn't really see the lens, you could see the radiance of the grains of sand. You could see the sunlight. So it's through chitta that these perceptions are revealed to us. And so when we move away from just saying, oh, chitta is the mind stuff, or chitta is the mind, when the aha moment comes that you are perceiving chitta, and that chitta can take on any form from the smallest to the largest of magnitude, that chitta is like this amazing recording device that's not just recording sound and sight, but the sense of touch, the sense of spaciousness, the movement of particles. It's as if all dimensions that are possible to be experienced are being recorded in this thing that we call chitta, and that is what we are seeing as our life play out in front of us. And again, Patanjali's use of this jewel or crystal, that's the best metaphor I can think of when I reflect upon my experiences, my aha moments with Chitta. And so it's beautiful the way that he writes this sutra and this insight, this hint that he's giving us about what is this experience that we call Chitta. And when our Chitta is clear, serene, anything that is placed in front of our Chitta at that point, we see clearly. We experience a state of samadhi with. That's why when samadhi is described, it's as if there's nothing else there except for what we are focusing on. If we are focusing on divine love, there is no I am feeling divine love. It's a direct experience of divine love. If we're focusing on the element fire, there's a complete absorption. There's no other distractions. There's no other vrittis. There's nothing else pulling at your attention. There is just the full, complete, absorbed experience into the reality of fire. And so this is why Chitta is such an essential variable within the practice of yoga. Because the practice of yoga, the asana, the pranayama, the yamas and niyamas, the ability to direct our awareness within, all of those things are to let Chitta become clear, let Chitta become still, let Chitta become serene, so that when we turn our attention to that which we want to experience samadhi with, we're able to do it. Now again, that term mind stuff, maybe that's easier to digest. If I said something like, if you're able to just sync your mind, to focus your mind on one thing completely, then you'll experience samadhi. Maybe that's helpful. But in the bigger picture, you need to think larger than the mind as we typically use that term. You have to imagine, sense, what if the wholeness of your being was able to sync its attention to replicate that which it is looking at flawlessly. Just like if you took a crystal and you set it down by a flower, the color of the flower would be flawlessly replicated in the crystal. And if the crystal has mirror-like qualities, the image of the flower would be replicated perfectly within the crystal. Again, that sense of the crystal is related to the perception of Chitta. Keep in mind, when you are practicing yoga, what are you doing essentially? You are reprogramming your Chitta. Instead of letting it get caught up in the dramas, the anxieties, the memories, the habits that keep you scattered and feeling like you are just a small person at the whims of fate, well then, if you are learning to be still, perceptive, responsive, rather than reactive, then you are becoming a yogi, because you are no longer at the mercy of these unconscious programs of Chitta. In a way, the path of yoga is becoming more and more conscious. And you continue on the path until you become so conscious that you're able to distinguish between the reality of your immortal essence as consciousness, rather than that which you are always perceiving, seeing, interacting with, that which comes and goes, that which fluctuates, that which changes. And it is through the engagement, the realization of what Chitta is, that you are able to do that. And maybe up until this point, you haven't thought about Chitta at all. You have to recall, in the previous episode, I had mentioned that Mr. Davis, my Kriya Yoga teacher, he didn't really encourage his teachers to go down the rabbit hole of Sanskrit. He thought it was helpful to try to speak to students in the language that they understood. And not everyone has the time or the capacity to try to fully comprehend what the Yoga Sutras mean in Sanskrit. And that's fine. And if your yoga practice has been functioning well, it's been moving in the direction of greater freedom, greater awareness, then you might not have to concern yourself too much with this. So this is more for the Sanskrit yogic nerds, I suppose, which I consider myself to be one of those at this time. But even if you're not so caught up in the Sanskrit of the Yoga Sutras, maybe this description will help you see the fullness of what you're doing with your yoga practice. And that all that you can see, all levels of your being, are part of these fluctuations and changes that you're learning to still, so that you can abide in this pure, flawless state of yoga, of samadhi. And then you keep abiding there until the process completes itself. It's often said that in yoga and in the path to enlightenment, that you can't force it, that there is an element of grace involved. And I completely agree in a way. However, in my experience, I've noticed that those people who till and prepare their gardens are more likely to get the fruits and the vegetables they need for success on their life path. But there is an element of surrender and waiting and patience even in tending a garden, because you can't force the seeds to grow. You can't force the harvest to come. So we have to have this balance of attending to our practices so that we are prepared for when the seeds give their fruits. We have to attend to our practices so that when the time comes for us to let go into that experience of samadhi, and finally that experience of kaivalya, which is often translated as enlightenment, that we're ready. We understand the process and that we've done all that we can. And now all we have to do is continue doing all that we can until the flower blooms. So this is a wonderful thing that we have access to, the knowledges and the practices of yoga. And if we stay intent on our path, we will in time be able to recognize the subtlety of Nirodha, as we discussed in the previous episode, as well as this reality of Chitta as our individualized field of awareness or our field of consciousness. And in time, we'll be able to experience that state of kaivalya, that aloneness of seeing, that culmination of yoga. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. A few resources you can explore. Recently, Danelle Mason, who's a Kriya Yoga teacher from New Zealand, Danelle and we completed a free course on Chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and that is at youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online. You can go to the playlist section and you'll find it there. We go through all of the sutras in Chapter 1. Danelle leads us through the chanting of the Sanskrit, and we explore a bit of commentary on it. So it can be very helpful for you to understand the Yoga Sutras a little more deeply. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about Sanskrit in general, I'd highly recommend finding classes at the American Sanskrit Institute. This is Vilas Houston's organization, and that's at www.americansanskrit.com. So until next time, continue meditating, continue contemplating, and continue doing your best to live in accord with the yamas and niyamas. Peace. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kriya Yoga Podcast. To learn more about Kriya Yoga meditation, you can visit us at kriyayogaonline.com, where you can find information about current book releases, online classes, and in-person retreats throughout the year. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, visit us at the Kriya Yoga Online Patreon community at patreon.com/Kriya Yoga.